Welcome to Paneon. Welcome to Banias. Welcome to CESAREA Philippi. And welcome to Banias. So, which one is it? Is it Paneon, Banias, CESAREA Philippi, or perhaps Neronius? Actually, all these names are correct. They all apply to this beautiful site. Look around you. We're now situated north of the Kinneret, about 1 hour drive north of the Kinneret. It's the northern borders of the land of Israel, and we are standing at the foot of the Hermon mountain. And right here, it's one of the sources of the Jordan River. Look down here. This is the Banias spring. This is the beginning of the Banias River, or as it is known today, Hermon River. It's one of the three sources of the Jordan River. The same Jordan River where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. Only it happened away from here in the southern part of the Jordan River. But here, it's the source. This is where it all begins. The Jordan River has actually three sources: Dan, Chatzbani, and Banias, or Hermon, as we see it here. And if you look around at the lush green vegetation, the beautiful scene here, the magnificent rock scarp right there above me, this is a place perfectly situated for human dwellings, as not far away from us is the main road leading to Damascus. So it's a perfect site to build a city. Indeed, it is also a perfect site for armies moving from south and north to meet and battle against each other. Indeed, in the year 200 BCE, not far from here, a main battle took place. The battle between the Seleucid Empire on the one hand and the Ptolemid Empire on the other hand. The Ptolemids came from Egypt. The Seleucids are the rulers of Syria, and they clash here at Banias. And this is the famous battle of Banias, or Paneon, after which the Seleucids began to rule this country. They are the heirs of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian. But now it's a different story. The Seleucids at one point begin to persecute the Jews under the king Antiochus IV, and that leads to the rebellion of the Hasmoneans and the Hanukkah holiday that we celebrate today. Already in ancient times, in the Hellenistic era, there was a place of worship here dedicated to the god Pan. I'm going to talk about that shortly. So probably that's the source of the original name of the site, Paneon, the place where Pan is worshipped. Later, King Herod the Great received this area from his patron, Emperor Augustus. So he built a temple dedicated to Augustus right here. I'm going to show it to you. Later, King Herod's son, Philippus, decided to build a city here. This is the first city we know of. It was dedicated in the year 2 BC. All right. And then he renames it, of course. And he names it CESAREA Philippi. Philippi after him. Caesarea after his patron Augustus. In the 1st century AD, in the time of Agrippa, the Jewish king, it's Agrippa II, in the 50s and the beginning of the 60s, Caesarea Philippi is rebuilt by Agrippa. And again, he renames it, this time after his patron, Emperor Nero. So from now on it is known as Neronius. But having said that, the original name Paneon always remained. And eventually, the battle of names ended up by the great victory of the ancient name Paneon, only this time it was pronounced a little bit differently. Instead of Paneon, Panias. And when the Muslims conquered the country in the 7th century, they kept on using the same name, Panias. However, they found it difficult to pronounce the P. Instead, they pronounced it as a B, and Panias became Banyas. So here we are at the central site of worship of the god Pan 2000 years ago at Banyas. This site has also a very important Christian connection. Let me tell you about it. In the New Testament, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, we read the following. When Jesus came to the region of CESAREA Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Obviously, he refers to himself. The Son of Man refers to himself. They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "What do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ." Christ means in Greek and Latin, Messiah, the anointed one, literally someone who was anointed. Some say, therefore, that he is Elijah, some say John the Baptist, but now comes Peter and he says, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter." We'll explain that shortly. "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades," or according to other translations, the gates of hell, "will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. So what we learn from these verses is quite simple. We learn that Jesus came to a place called Caesarea Philippi with his disciples. Where is Caesarea Philippi? Well, as I told you earlier on, this is Caesarea Philippi. We are in Caesarea Philippi. This is the name of the city built by Philip, the son of King Herod, in the year 2 BCE. Now, we also learn that Caesarea Philippi is the place where there's an interesting discussion between Jesus and his disciples. He inquires them as to his identity. Who do you think I am? Who knows his new character, what he really is, his essence? In most cases, we hear, such as in Kursi, about demons, powers who recognize Jesus as divine, as the Messiah, as a Christ. But here, these are human beings. These are his disciples. And Peter says, "You are the Christ." Jesus' response is interesting. He says, I'll repeat that because it's very interesting. He says, literally, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Now that sounds very odd. What does he mean when he says, "You are Peter"? I mean, his name is Peter, right? But no, Peter is actually his nickname. His real name is Shimon in Hebrew, or Simon. At this point he receives the nickname of Peter, because Peter comes from Greek. It means rock or stone. So actually Jesus gives him this name. His title is Peter, Petros, or Petros in Greek. And he says, symbolically, you are going to be the basis on which I will build my church. Or is it symbolic? Wait a second. Look around you. Look at the beautiful rock scarp. How impressive it is. And look at this piece of rock right next to me. When Jesus says, you are Peter, you are the rock, is this just a symbolic saying? Or maybe, as I imagine it, maybe he's sitting somewhere around here, pointing at this rock or maybe another, and says, you are the rock, just like this rock, you are going to be the foundation of my church. It's just a possibility. But it's interesting to think that maybe the symbolism in the words of Jesus actually relies on actual topographical features here at Banias, which is the most impressive part here. Something which drew believers to the site already in the Hellenistic era, into the caves and rock formations around us. And he also continues to say, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or hell, will not overcome it. Is there any connection to hell or Hades, the underworld here in Banias? Well, to some extent, I believe, yes, there is some connection here to hell. It's not said in the New Testament. No one else explicitly says that. But in a moment, I'm going to show you a cave where it all began. The entire pagan worship here began with that cave. And that cave, according to ancient sources from the Second Temple period, was extremely deep, so deep that no one could measure its depth. Well, it's logical to think that for people at the time, if something goes so deep into the ground, into the bedrock, eventually it ends up where? In hell, in the underworld. So I can't help thinking that maybe the imagery in the words of Jesus, which is so well known, about rock and hell, perhaps derive from the rock formation here and the cave which has no end and no bottom. So the cave is the focal point here. Let me take you there. That's where it all began. Here we are standing next to the beautiful rock scarp, but you can clearly see that part of it is actually not natural. It is man-made. Some carvings and niches. I'll refer to that shortly. But the basic feature here, which is natural definitely, is right behind my back. This is the magnificent cave behind me. That cave is a natural feature. And when Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian, refers to the site of Caesarea Philippi and the fountain here, he refers probably to this natural feature. People believed that this is where the Jordan River began already 2,000 years ago. They didn't know that for certain, but they imagined that. They had that theory already back then. But this is also the site associated with the god Pan. Remember, the god Pan is the main figure in Panias or Banias. Who's that god? Well, Pan is the son of Hermes, one of the famous gods in the Greek mythology, and the grandson of Zeus, also known in the Roman period as Jupiter, the father of gods. Now, here we have a temple dedicated to Pan. I'll show it to you in a moment. But the cave was probably the focal point of Pan's worship in antiquity. Why? Because Pan is a god associated with shepherds, with nature, with forests, and so on and so forth. He is a god of nature. Now, it is said that when he was born, he was quite different than the other gods. He was actually half man, half goat. The lower part, from the waist down, goat, and the upper part, waist up, human. He also had a goat's beard and horns coming from his head. Quite a terrifying sight, if you ask me. According to one of the myths, when he was born, his mother was so terrified that she ran away. Imagine what that does to the soul of the little child. But anyhow, she was basically what we would say, she was panicked. Well, the word panic comes from Pan, the god of the forest. If you meet him in the dark night in the forest, you will be panicked, you will be frightened. So his mother was panicked too. Pan is worshipped in caves, not always, but in many cases. So it makes sense that this is the focal point of his worship. This is where it all began in the Hellenistic era. Outside Pan's cave, there are some archaeological remains. By the way, those of you who haven't been here for quite a while, and that's the case, I guess, during the COVID-19 situation, you may not know that recent excavations down here revealed something new that we had no idea of its existence before. So what do we see here? Look carefully at the western end of the site and you can clearly see a built wall with a niche. The niche is actually domed at the top. To the left, the remains of another niche, and then of another one. A fourth one here and a fifth one here. Some of them are round niches, some of them are rectangular. When we see niches in archaeology in the Holy Land, it's usually either a place for the Torah scrolls in a synagogue, or a Christian apse in a church, or a niche of a mihrab, a prayer niche, in a mosque. So which one's here? Actually, it's none of them. These niches are niches for statues, and they belong to a temple built here probably in the time of King Herod. Why do we think it's from the time of King Herod? Well, firstly, because what we have here is pottery from the time of King Herod, such as, for instance, a typical lamp from his time. But also because Josephus tells us that when King Herod was granted the region of Banias by his patron, by Emperor Augustus, he builds a temple to honor Augustus in Banias. This may have been that temple. Why may have been? Why not for certain? Because we have other candidates. 3 kilometers away, that's about 2 miles away from us, there's a place called the ruin of Omrit. And over there, there's a Roman temple, probably from the time of King Herod. Some claim that that is the temple of Herod. That is the temple dedicated to Augustus. Others suggest that the temple of King Herod used to be on a higher level, where a typical Herodian-style wall was excavated in this region. So we actually have 3 options. But until proven otherwise, let's assume this is the temple of Augustus, or the Augusteum, as we call it in archaeology, a temple dedicated to Augustus. Obviously, if you hear about a temple dedicated to Tiberius, such as in Caesarea, we won't call it Augusteum, we would call it Tiberium. So this is an Augusteum, a temple dedicated to Augustus, as far as we can tell. But maybe it's not this site, maybe it's in another place, who knows? At this point we have no clear idea about that. In recent excavations, right here, the archaeologists have found the remains of another building built into the remains of the ancient temple. That building is later than the Herodian temple, and we can actually see down there some remains of walls and a nice, not too elaborate mosaic floor. This building dates from the time of the Byzantines. It is a church, an unknown church until now. So this is one of the new discoveries here at Banias. We mentioned Pan. I said he had a temple here. But where's that temple? Let me take you and we'll see that together. All right, we've seen the Great Cave, and we said that the worship of Pan probably took place already in the Hellenistic era, that is, before the time of Jesus, and even later, and then a temple dedicated to Augustus was probably built in front of it, and we haven't shown you yet a temple dedicated to Pan himself. Where is it? Well, apparently it's this structure. Now, is this a built structure, an enclosure? It looks like more of a courtyard, and its focal point is this large artificial niche. Why do we have this niche? Why would someone bother to carve into the bedrock this large niche? Well, the explanation is quite simple, I guess. The original cave is now blocked by the temple dedicated to Augustus. What about Pan? You need to find some place for him too. He's the owner, he's the patron, he's the guardian of this site. So in order to have a temple dedicated to Pan, they had this platform paved in stones, and then the wall carved, the bedrock wall carved, to create a copy of the original cave. Maybe that's the idea. All right, makes sense, but how do we know it actually has anything to do with Pan? Of course, you trust me, I'm a doctor, right, but that's not enough. In history and archaeology, we're looking for written sources to confirm our hypothesis, and in this case, we have something. Look at the great niche. On top of that, there's a smaller one, beautifully adorned by pillars on the right and on the left, and a beautiful dome, half dome, carved to look like a conch. Such niches are known in the Roman period, and usually they house statues. So the question is, whose statue used to be there? The answer's immediately under the niche. In the area, the flat area, immediately under the pillars to the right and to the left, there's a flat rock and two little triangles, one on each side. In between them, it's actually an inscription. We can read it. That inscription is an inscription left here by a donor, someone who contributed money to this site to adorn it. His name is Victor, the son of Lysimachus. His name's on the inscription. And he says that he dedicated it to the goddess Echo. Now, who's goddess Echo, you ask? Echo was loved by Pan. But as you recall, Pan was not the handsome type, and she didn't return his love. And therefore, his dogs tore her into pieces. That was a horrible death, and she screamed and screamed. And only the echo of her screams remains. That's where we got the echo. So this is dedicated to the lover of Pan, to the woman he loved. But it also says it is dedicated to Pan himself. So this dedicatory inscription tells us the identity of this site is connected to the god Pan and his lover. But you perhaps would like to ask me another question. When was it built? Is it from the time of Jesus? Well, we have another inscription. You see, there's another niche over there to the right. And next to the niche, another inscription. Same style. On that inscription, the same guy, remember his name is Victor, dedicates this niche to Pan and Hermes. Now, who's Hermes? Hermes is Pan's father. It's all in the family. So it is a family estate, if you wish, belonging to gods. Pan, Echo, the woman he loved, and his father, Hermes. Makes sense. But in addition, the inscription tells us when he built it. And the answer is, it's in the year 150. Wait a second. In the year 150, 150 to what? You may tend to think that it's 150 AD, just like we count today, 2021 AD, right? Meaning AD, Anno Domini, the years of the Lord. Jesus, that is, the birth of Jesus, right? Wrong. These people aren't Christians. The Christian calendar, counting the years from the time of the birth of Jesus, was not invented yet. It will be developed in the 6th century by Dionysius Exiguus, a priest. So this inscription stating that the site was built or dedicated in 150, the niche over there, was dedicated in the year 150, it cannot relate to the birth of Jesus. But we have the answer. In any Roman city, if it was important enough, we find a local calendar. A calendar that begins counting the years from the establishment, from the inauguration of that city. Now, if you recall, at the introduction I said that Banias, as a city named CESAREA Philippi, was established in the year 2 BC. Well, actually, it's actually between 2 and 1 BC. So the year 150 probably refers to the establishment of this city. In our words, it would be the year 148 AD. Not too far from the calendar that we know, from the birth of Jesus. But yet, it's an interesting and important difference. Why? Because that place belonged to pagans, and they count the years from the establishment of this city as a pagan city dedicated to so many pagan gods. Yet, around the year 30, Jesus with his disciples sits somewhere around here, maybe next to that rock I showed you before. And what we know is that what's going to follow is the establishment of a new religion known as Christianity. It is actually almost the birth of Christianity as we know it. And Christians will count the years from the birth of Jesus. Whoever had this inscription put here or carved here didn't know that. But basically, it's almost the end of the pagan world as we know it and the beginning of the Christian world. This is a time when a great revolution in the history of humankind is about to occur. So the calendar, the years, sometimes hide something which is way deeper than just counting the years. But there's another temple, surprisingly enough, another temple right behind my back. Let's go there. This is one of the finest buildings found in the Acropolis, in the area of the high area of the temples of Banias. We've seen the cave of Pan, the Augusteum perhaps, and then the open courtyard dedicated to Pan himself and the woman he loved and his father. So it's basically a family issue here, right? And if we find another structure adorned with these beautiful columns with Corinthian-style capitals, we may assume that this is another temple dedicated to another member of the family, right? Indeed, you're right. This temple is dedicated to Zeus, the father of gods. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, is the grandfather of Pan, and therefore it makes sense to have a temple dedicated to Zeus. But can we prove it? Yes, we can. An altar was found here, bearing an inscription mentioning this temple as the temple of Zeus and Pan. Which is interesting. In each and every temple, we see Pan and another member of the family. The temple of Zeus is probably one of the finest. Look at the dressing of the stone, the tooling, how fine it is, how nice it is. Imagine being covered with plaster, decorated, perhaps with frescoes. That would be probably an amazing sight to see. Okay, but this is not the end of it. There's another temple. Let me take you there. It's not too far. It's right around the corner. You can actually see the floor of this temple behind me. Let's go. Adjacent to the temple of Zeus, there's another temple. A small shrine, though, associated with the niche carved in the bedrock. Now, when we ask whose temple could it be, you may think, okay, we got it now. We have Pan, we have Echo, we have Hermes, we have Zeus. This must be another member of the royal family, but don't push it too much. It isn't. This is a temple dedicated to Nemesis. Nemesis is the goddess of revenge and also the goddess of justice. Sometimes some people believe justice and revenge may go together. Others would perhaps dispute that. Look at the floor. This is the unique find here. Look at this beautiful floor. It's all authentic, preserved from the 2nd century AD. Amazing. Look at it and note the colors. White, pink, white, pink, white, white, pink, pink. It's a checkered pattern, just like a huge chessboard. Imagine entering this temple, this shrine. The doors are opening and you find yourself on this floor, and who knows what would be over there next to the bedrock. Unfortunately, it was all destroyed. Think that we've finished? No. There are so many gods. There must be something else in here. So let me take you to one of the greatest things that hide in the next room over there, the next hall. Another temple, but this is something that you probably never heard of and never seen before. Follow me. Now, this is truly amazing. Look around you. We can see the walls of course, the inevitable niche in the wall. Every temple here is associated with a niche, probably with a statue of the god associated with it. But in this open courtyard, we can see something else. We can see little niches under the floor. Now it looks like a bench. I'm sitting on it, but now when I move, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 11, 10, 11, and so on and so forth. Some of them are blocked now. What is this? It is unparalleled. It is unique. So the excavators dug inside. And what we find inside are typical clay vessels that we find in any temple. These are probably remains of offerings given to the gods. But in addition, we have here the bones of hundreds of goats. What are these goats doing here under the temple, under the unique shrine? One would perhaps assume that they were consumed. Maybe they were slaughtered and then eaten or offered, burnt as an offering to the gods. But close examination showed that these bones do not carry any sign of knives, of cutting on them. Therefore, the excavator's conclusion was that these goats died of old age and later buried here reverently with some offerings. Goats revered in a temple? Does that make any sense? Of course it does. Remember Pan. It is a large sanctuary. Pan is the main player here. He's the big boss of Panias. And Pan is half goat, half man. We know that goats took part in the rites of Pan in antiquity. So it does make sense to assume that these goats were revered as holy symbols, perhaps, of the god Pan, and when they died, they were reverently buried in these niches. Now admit it, that gives a new meaning to the expression holy goat. Mind you, the excavators digging here named this site the shrine or the temple of the holy goats. We've reached our final destination, the last temple, as far as we can tell, because if you look over there, you can see that none of that section was actually excavated, and many more temples may still hide there. But for now, this is the end, this is the western end of this acropolis of temples, the high altars of Banias. And right below me are the remains of another temple. Not much of it survived. There are scant remains of walls around, integrated into the bedrock, and you can still see the significance of the rock here. Everything's in the rock, carved into the rock, or integrated in the rock. And if the rock does not succumb, then they cut it and carve it to fit. So if you look down, you can clearly see now the remains of another holy sanctuary with a large apse. Remember, it is the Roman period, it's not Christian, it's not Jewish, certainly not Muslim. It is an apse of a sanctuary from the Roman period. And that apse is quite unique, as attached to it on the outside is another apse. So there's a big apse and another one, or a big niche and another one. What is the significance of this? Well, we need to look at the coins of Banias. One of the Roman coins of Banias present the god Pan, of course, that's what you'd expect, playing the flute, and there are goats in front of him, standing on their back feet, dancing, as it seems, to the sound of his music. If you look carefully at the coin, you can see that there's a big arch, and on top of that, another arch. Perhaps it symbolizes one of the niches that we see here carved in bedrock, maybe the big one we've seen earlier. Remember? But maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe these arches aren't standing arches, and these are not caves carved in bedrock, but rather what we see down here. A big arch and a small one. And if so, then perhaps that coin actually refers to the rite that took place here in this structure. Dancing goats. Perhaps it was part of the rite of the god Pan. And therefore, this sanctuary earned its name, the sanctuary of the dancing goats. So, what have we got here? We've seen a temple dedicated probably to Augustus, another temple dedicated to Pan, a chapel or a niche dedicated to the woman he loved, the goddess Echo, another one dedicated to Hermes, another shrine dedicated to Zeus, Jupiter, another one dedicated to Nemesis, the goddess of justice and revenge, another one having to do with Pan again, dedicated to the holy goats, and another one, perhaps a temple dedicated to the dancing goats. A multitude of temples, and many more perhaps still await excavation. We don't know if this is all of the temples that were here during the Roman period. What did Jesus see around the year 30 AD when he comes to Banias? What does he see? Well, most of the temples that we see today belong to the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, many years after Jesus. But remember, the temple dedicated to Augustus existed in the time of Jesus. The temple dedicated to Pan, the one with the large niche carved into the bedrock, perhaps also existed in the time of Jesus, because you see the inscription there, the dedicatory inscription mentions the year 150, but that's when the other niches were added, the chapels were added. So maybe the main temple, the main shrine, the main court dedicated to Pan existed already in the time of Jesus. It's a possibility. Nevertheless, remember also, this is one of the oldest pagan shrines or holy pagan sites in this country, still standing in the time of Jesus, going back to the Hellenistic era. And over here, bedrock and buildings are combined together, integrated into one solid statement of paganism. This is the world that's going to be shattered by Christianity, replaced by the message of Jesus. So from a theological point of view, we see the logic in coming to this specific place, to Banias, one of the ancient sources of paganism, where the Jordan River begins. And here, especially in this site, insisting to declare the establishment of the church with Peter as its head. He is the head of the new church, of the ecclesia, of the community, but also the Christian church of the future. And he is also the bedrock himself. The pagan temples are built on real bedrock, natural bedrock, physical bedrock. The Christian church will be built on faith, on humans who create a community. That's the big difference. This is the beginning of a huge change in the history of humanity. This is the significance of this site. This is the northernmost site Jesus will ever reach, according to the New Testament. From here, once he established the church with Peter, with the believers, he will begin the gradual return to the south. The return that will Pesach, to the crucifixion, the burial, and later the resurrection and the ascension from the Mount of Olives, as it is related in the New Testament. So the journey we have made goes along the Galilee, the Golan, and even reaches Mount Hermon. This is the territory of the ministry of Jesus around the year 30 AD.